join with me in giving a great big startup grind welcome to Bohdan Zabawskyj. Thank you for putting this in your agenda. I know that you're a busy guy. Appreciate it. I'm sure everybody else appreciates it. How many faces out there you don't actually recognize?
A couple. Actually, there are a lot of new faces in the crowd, and actually I do see this as giving back to the community. As someone who's actually gone through the startup grind several times, one thing I always lamented was it wasn't a great support community, particularly during my Redknee era. And one of the things that motivates me is giving that essence back, by all the trials and tribulations, lessons learned back into the community.
So, tell us about a little bit about the arc of the story. A little bit about your career before the Redknee story. So, what was it that got you interested in being an entrepreneur to begin with, or getting engaged in startups, or were you recruited at a big company? How did that happen?
Okay, first of all, can people hear me without the mic?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I'll put that down. And if people in the back can't hear me, just wave your arms or let me know. I'll try and I'll pick up the mic. But I guess I started my career, 2.5 decades ago, and probably the most anti-entrepreneurial company I could think of, which is Bell Canada. I guess I would still characterize myself as not an entrepreneur. In a weird way, I would characterize myself as an entrepreneur helper. So there's a force that sort of attracts me to an entrepreneur, but I've never made the leap and started a company on my own.
Right.
Okay, so let me start back. So in the late 80s, so I'm really dating myself, I graduated as a young engineer out of University of Toronto in engineering science. And I went looking for a job, and at the time, it was, I think, the end of a recessionary period, and there weren't really a lot of options. There was forestry, some sort of big industry, there was mining, and there was telecom. I chose telecom. And since then, I really never looked back. So I joined the Bell Canada empire and stayed within the BCE community for 7 years. So that includes Bell Canada, Bell Mobility, Bell Northern Research. Who here knows about Bell Northern Research? Okay, cool, good. There are a lot of people who don't know it. I would describe Bell Northern Research as Google before Google, which was kind of cool. It was a strictly Canadian thing. Unfortunately, it completely dematerialized with the implosion of Nortel, but it was a really, really great collection of Canadian and actually international talent throughout in Ottawa, Montreal, and several regional jurisdictions. In any event, in the first 7 years, I wasn't doing anything particularly entrepreneurial, with one exception. I guess I had a really great boss who took a chance on me, and I was basically placed in charge of several key initiatives within Bell Canada. So I learned a lot in terms of leadership, cross-functional management, project management, and I grew, I guess, as sort of a young engineering manager. My first big break, my first real trip into entrepreneurship or an entrepreneurial entity was with a company called ClearNet. Who remembers ClearNet? Okay, good portion of you, that's awesome. ClearNet, for those of you who know, was eventually acquired by TELUS. So all the flora and fauna theme, that's actually the old ClearNet brand, which was supposed to be future friendly. So it was quite a jump. I basically went from a 50,000 person entity to a 100-person entity, and since then I never looked back. I think ClearNet grew from 94, which was pre-launch, to the time it was acquired, to about 2,400 people. We went from roughly $30 million in annual revenue to $500 million in revenue, and in August...
What was your role there?
I was a director level role. So I was in much the same way as I was in charge of various initiatives in the Bell Canada Empire. I was in charge of various initiatives, working for Aristodato, and actually I had a weird role. Half of me was an engineer, working on technology planning and technology development. Half of me was working for regulatory affairs because they discovered I could write. So it's a little interesting thing. Half of me was sort of just doing pseudo-regulatory work under Bob Simmons at the time.
Okay. And then after ClearNet?
After ClearNet, interesting enough, well, what happened was, I guess I'll jump right to that. In August 2000, they were acquired by TELUS for $6.7 billion, so twice the value of Snapchat. at that point in time. It was still big money. And interesting enough, I was not looking into joining a telecom entity again, or an incumbent. I really wanted to get away from that.
Was there an option package at that time? Was that part of the world at
Yeah,
that time?
ClearNet was definitely gave options, and that was really my first taste. So
Okay.
the ability to have full accountability, the ability to have full responsibility, and of course the upside.
And out of the 94, was everybody on an option package at that time, or was it like 10 or 15 or
I think
25?
a good proportion of the company, definitely management and up.
Okay.
Any manager had some option pool, as far as I know. So obviously I stayed with them for 4.5 years. They were fully vested.
Right.
And I guess I remember the outcome was not enough to retire, obviously, but six figures. It was a really nice incentive. I came across actually a co-op student that had been mentored within the context of ClearNet, Lucas Kukowski. And he had this crazy idea for a real-time billing solution that would service wireless carriers, and I signed on as employee number 8.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the beginning of my Redknee tenure in literally August 2000.
Wow.
So the key lesson was don't be cruel to your co-ops, I guess.
And he was the founder, and how long did he remain kind of the center person there?
He's still there.
Oh, is he?
So there are really 4 key founders, himself, Vishal Katari, Rubens Rahim, and Dan McDonald.
Okay.
And they're all still employed, or a big factor of Redknee to this day.
And how many, so you were employee number 8,
Correct.
and how many so Redknee went public?
Yes, in 2007.
2007. What was the valuation, or what's been the peak valuation of the company?
Well, actually, the peak valuation was late last year. I think it was in order of $800 million.
And do you expect that that's going to cycle up again as we emerge?
I like to think so. I'm still a shareholder.
Right.
So a long-term believer in Redknee.
And is it public in Canada, or is it public in?
It's public on the TSX. So in 2007, I think we actually went on the AIM exchange in London initially.
Yeah.
Then we went to the TSX.
And so one of the things that we talked about offline before the chat was about how that story is not as well-known story outside of the people that you've had an influence on or who have been directly involved in the company. And one of the reasons is because that wasn't a venture-backed company. So, perhaps some thoughts on, the pros and cons of being a venture-backed company, and how that affected Redknee's outcomes.
What's interesting, I guess it is interesting. I always reflect on what made Redknee successful, and I guess part of it was that we were ironically not venture-backed, so we didn't have the distortion or influence of VCs with maybe a shorter term life cycle or hypothesis around Redknee. So it also forced us to be extraordinarily lean, or what's considered to be lean methodology, that's considered to be lean practices. We're establishing lean practices, agile development practices, well before they became, I guess, in the contemporary development vernacular today. It also forced us to be, brutally honest and help us focus our product portfolio over time. And I guess the key limiting factor was awareness. Like Redknee was a lesser known Canadian success story, and it still is,
right?
Unfortunately.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so what about your advice to startups today? I mean, is there, are there situations where they should really be seeking venture capital? Or, would you advise them to stay away from venture capital? What?
I guess my generic advice is if you can build organically or bootstrap, I would do so as long as possible to avoid dilution. And I understand there are benefits, obviously, towards seeking capital with regards to accelerating your growth strategy, acquiring people that you need to build your product out. But the bottom line is, if you can hold out as long as possible, that would be the general rule of thumb I would advise.
So I hope everybody's got some questions. One of the things that we kind of lose when we're in the big rooms is that ability to interact. So we're going to do a lot of Q&A today. But before I move to that, so what are the secrets? I mean, both as a CTO, that maybe the recruitment story. How were you brought into Rypple, or how were you brought into the next venture? And why do you choose, this venture over that venture. I think that's interesting from a non-technical founder's perspective. Is how do I get the best talent?
Okay, fair enough. Actually, I don't think there's any, and I advise about half a dozen companies formally, several more informally. And I think there's a lot of synergies between my day jobs and the companies I advise. I look for a compelling vision, ideally something that's going to be disruptive in some factor or in some fashion. I look for a compelling culture, if there are a few people involved. A culture that is energetic, that's collaborative, where there's a strong degree of team cohesion, and fundamentally leadership, or a leader, someone that I can believe in.
So let me dig into that last part, because collaboration, those words, what gives you that comfort that it's going to be collaborative? What gives you that comfort, that it's going to be in the right place to get work done?
Well, in the case of, for example, when I was in a, I guess, 2-month recycle with Rypple, so right. I got literally 2 to 3 meetings over 2 months. So I got to they got to know me. I got to know them fairly well. I think I met at least half the company by the time I got there, and everyone had the same compelling vision. Everyone had the same passion. Everyone gave me the same degree of excitement, the same vibe. So to me, by the time I got there, I had a really good sense of the company culture.
Mm-hmm. And so a little bit about the Rypple story. First of all, okay, we'll come back to this, but so who's got a question? Who's got something that they need to know?
What have you found are some of the tipping points where then you got to do it? And it's because you got to give yourself enough runway to, if you need to, then go make it happen. So are there certain tipping points or signs that make companies go, okay, now is the time?
Well, I guess a few caveats. One is you should always be talking to venture capital or investors. It is like everything else, like every other relationship, it takes time to develop some degree of trust, and they have to understand the story, how capital is going to be used. But fundamentally, you have to understand how that capital is going to be used. If it's just going to be sitting in a bank or getting, you really have to understand how that capital is going to really contribute to your story. If you don't have that nailed down yet, then you should probably hold off again. Does that make sense?
So is it just knowing how the money is going to be spent versus not needing the money to spend? Right? Because you basically said, if you don't need it, hold off as long as possible. But I may not, as a company, you may not need it, but you can know what you would do if you had it. So what is that point at which you say, okay, you should stop doing organically, you should now go fast?
Okay, I don't think there's a definitive answer. So if you look, for example, at Kick, they have next to no revenue at this point in time, so they need capital to continue their, I guess, geometric growth.
How many people are familiar with Kick? Okay, it's a messaging service, yeah.
So it's over the top messaging service right now at about 140, 150 million users, but in order to support that, in order to get development, in order to have the servers and operating state, they need quite a bit of capital. So there they have no alternative other than to get VC money to fund that growth strategy. If you have revenues, I guess the issue is, what are you going to use that money for? Is it sales? Is it marketing? Is it product development? Is it a new product niche or a new product vertical? But only it's highly tailored to the startup at hand.
How did you land up in the CTO position? Like, to you, what is that role? And are you still in that role? Like, you in touch with what's latest in technology, or do you see it more as a management role?
Okay, interesting question. So I commonly quip that the T in my title does not stand for technology, stands for therapy. So it has turned into a very much of a, I guess, humanistic role, where, for example, obviously while I'm in touch with technology to the extent I get to ask the right questions and try and ascertain what's the appropriate decision tree or the appropriate path along the decision tree. But a lot of what I deal with is what I consider human-related issues, process-related issues. How to find the right people. I focus a lot on culture. So in the case of where, for example, Mercatus is right now, I lead a team of about 25 developers, QA people, product designers. A lot of my time is spent on shaping the team in terms of who are the key people in that team, the processes associated with that team, and ideally the cultural attributes of that team.
Tell us what Mercatus does.
Here is familiar with Spotify or Shopify. So usually the quick
Careful, they're one of our sponsors.
No, Shopify is amazing, but Mercatus is more amazing. But
Strike that from the video.
well,
No, I'm kidding.
in a nutshell, if you're familiar with Shopify, I would describe Mercatus as a Shopify on steroids for large retail grocers. And by large, I mean retail grocers that serve between $1 and $10 billion of revenue per year. So we focus on e-commerce and fulfillment for large retail grocery chains. I guess the key distinguishing factors, other than scale, is we plug right into the grocer's infrastructure. So we'll plug into their point of sale systems, logistical systems. We'll plug into their existing technology, marketing partners, couponing systems, flyer systems. We provide our own business logic on top of that, and on top of that, we abstract everything with RESTful APIs that in turn powers the front end. So if you want live examples, there's a Price Chopper in the United States and Sprouts in the United States. You can log on and see that's basically what we do.
All right, let's say I want to do a lean startup that with this technology that plugs into the existing technology at this billion-dollar grocery chain. How would I find out what their existing technology infrastructure is that I would need to integrate into before I could approach them with an idea?
You would plug into Mercatus. In a very real sense. That's exactly what we're trying to do. So what we find is there's a lot of legacy, and maybe this is what the market that we're in, like they have a lot of proprietary technologies, they have a lot of legacy technologies. We do the heavy lifting of integrating with their back-end infrastructure. And in turn, we abstract all that information, all those capabilities with an available API. Like at this point in time, we're providing, or we're outsourcing, or we actually provide the front-end mobile applications and web applications, but I see a time where they'll allow another layer of abstraction to open it up to other people or other companies.
Go ahead.
In your experience, what are the prominent factors for being able to know when a work environment is not up to par?
By not at the par, okay, so I guess I look, for me, I look at productivity, fundamentally, I guess from a straight management perspective, I look, are people able to do the work? So, and I try and do sort of root cause analysis. Is it people don't have the appropriate tools? That may very well be the answer. Is it a process related issue? Because I've seen odd processes that have spawned to life, and I have perhaps a relatively unique view on process. I believe in process with a small p, and the truth of the matter is processes should always be evolving. Processes always have a context. The processes are always derived in a context to serve a specific need, and it's amazing to see that processes just linger and linger and linger without people just asking why. Does this still make sense? As an example, within one company, they actually had an electronic ticketing mechanism or requirements management system, JIRA, and a parallel paper-based system. And no one bothered to ask, why? Is this the best way of doing things? I did, and we eliminated the paper-based mechanism because it was not scalable, and it was detracting from productivity. In some cases, it may be personnel related. So there may be a few people that are toxic, that are caustic, and you have to do a great deal of due diligence, and that's by asking a lot of questions. Like the first thing I did at every company that I started at is I talked to everyone. I sat down and they got to know me, I got to know them, and I asked a lot of questions, and they got to ask me a lot of questions. So in a way, the first thing I do, no matter what, is I do a quick survey. Then I keep on asking people until I really determine what's the likely root cause of an issue.
Thank you.
Is there like a scenario they had in mind? I'm just curious.
I was just is for future knowledge of what to look for.
Okay, well, step one, ask a lot of questions and observe.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Marcy.
I'd like to know, in your process when you go in and you look at, you meet everybody to determine the root causes of things, how long does that take you to get to a decision? Let's say, well, to maybe let go of somebody, make some changes. How long do you think it takes?
That's highly, it's highly scenario dependent.
Average.
It really depends. So if for example, if I was looking at the paper-based versus electronic system, that was a pretty quick, low-hanging fruit decision. Human-related or personnel-related issues, those tend to be longer. I mean, because you really, you really have to make sure that maybe, again, with regards to the person, they just haven't been told that they may be resulting or they may be causing a rift between departments or between people within their team. So a lot of it is, even if you suspect that's it's a personal related issue, you at least I feel, as someone that wants to continue to help people, you really try and make sure that they've been informed, that you can try and help them through this, and really terminating a person's the last resort.
Sure, I understand. I was just curious, like how, the length of time it takes, though, to get to to help them or to try or to make that decision. Just on average. I ask because I'm in that type of business, so I was just curious.
About 2 to 3 days, no. Honestly, it's really tough. I would say it's hard to accelerate it before 3 months. It really depends. Like, obviously, if you're burning cash and you have to make a decision, you're gonna get rid of question marks first. But if you have time, if you really have a bit of buffer and you really believe that there's hope, then you're gonna extend it a bit longer. But generally, I would say the time frames are 3 to 6 months.
Thank you so much. That's actually very helpful.
What are the names of the companies that you advise?
Formally,
Formally.
Kick Interactive in Waterloo, Print Shop in Waterloo, Staff.com in Ottawa, Real Sociable, who's in the audience, Kinzel in the audience, and I'm missing one. Oh, Dev Barbecue also in the audience.
And so what's the key to establishing a great advisory relationship? How can a startup advise a startup on the kind of advisor that they should be seeking, and how to compensate them properly, and how to get them engaged?
Okay, well, I actually gave a whole presentation on this.
Well, you only have 5 minutes.
I know. So first of all, again, I think I'm a bit atypical for an advisor. I'm not the guy that has regularly scheduled, 1 hour per month meetings. I don't think that a startup would get any value of that personally. I'm fairly operational for an advisor. So maybe what I'll do, I can use the Kick as an example. So I've been advising Kick for about 4 years. So in the early days, and that's everything, it does change over time. So in the early days, it was helping them with people, hiring people, interviewing people, helping them with their early architecture. When they were going through that crazy growth spurt of 1 million users in 10 days, 3 million users in a month, 4 million users in 40 days, then they got sued by BlackBerry. Then I actually helped them with their legal defense. So I was on the call in real time with their legal team, defining the defense strategy. And I should, as an aside,
How many people thought it was a good idea? Sorry for cutting you. How many thought it was a good idea for BlackBerry to sue Kick? Okay, that's what I thought. And how much time are you spending with them? Like,
It varies. So obviously in the context of SR&D, that's a huge chunk of
Yeah.
time. But it varies. Like, I guess the key thing, if there's a problem, they can call me.
And so in that case, are they giving you a project and then you're saying, okay, let's carve this out and say, okay, this is a deliverable, let's do a separate deal to the advisory group? Or to the advisory deal?
It's entirely variable. So it really depends on the context of the startup. But if there's a big project, I'm doing it just because it's one of those things that I don't like to do, but I have a knack at doing.
Right. Wow. That's incredible support. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that makes or breaks companies. Okay, go ahead.
At some point, technical people, you just do technical engineering work all the time. What are like the key thing that changes, and what is like the thing that served you the most in being a CTO?
I think what I enjoy is actually mentoring people and growing teams. I guess I've done it a few times now. I guess I didn't give numbers, but in the case of Redknee, I helped grow the engineering team from 5 people to under 60 people. Even during a short tenure at Rypple, I helped grow that team by 30%, helped its productivity by 80%, and I'm doing that all over again at Mercatus. So it's something about, I guess it's what I gravitate towards, growing teams, mentoring teams, and the cool part, maybe this is what gives me a lot of, I guess for lack of a better word, joy or enjoyment, is seeing the people that I mentor grow and become leaders in their own right. And if you look at the Redknee story, it has spawned a number of CEOs and successful executives in their own right. I could just rattle them off. There's Charles Chan at Wattpad. There's Dali Astrabadi, who's the CEO and founder of The Sociable in the audience. There's Karthik Ramakrishnan, who's the CEO of Gallup Media. There's Jason Tham, CEO of Newology. There's Dan Morrell, who's led several C-level positions and initiatives in the New York area. And it's just cool to see, people that you've mentored grow and become leaders.
See, that's the untold story that I feel needs to be told. I mean, there are not very many people who have been involved in the Ontario ecosystem that have mentored as many people and are as connected to pure startups. And I just think we should.
To a non-technical entrepreneur who thinks they've got the next best thing, and they feel they have to get a CTO. So the question is twofold. Where would they look? And then second is, how would you see that interview? What's the content of that interview?
Okay, I've been asked that question several times. It's tough. So one, I would look for someone who is frankly passionate about your idea or concept. And it's tough, for any non-technical resource, because obviously someone with a technological acumen, who's a great developer, great programmer, they're in high demand, let alone working for equity or whatever. So it is a long grind, but that means you really do have to find someone who's passionate about your concept. There are several things like founder dating. There are a few other startups started trying to experiment with a matchmaking service of sort. But I would probably, and this is true for recruiting generally, I would see that as a contact sport. I would advise going to meetup groups like Startup Drinks, various dev-oriented organizations, just to pitch your idea until you get traction with one or more individuals, and then you take it from there like any other relationship.
So you've been involved in building teams and hiring people. Let's say if you want to build a team for a company that you're working on, what is the kind of person that you want to have on your team, and what kind of culture you want to build so after you leave the company, the culture kind of sustains itself and grows?
I think my perspective on this has changed right now, or over time. I find over time, I de-emphasize formal credentials. So I worry less about their time on a technology. I worry less about what degrees they have. Obviously they still have to be competent at a given technology or skill. There are ways that you can easily validate that. We have various quizzes and
You
tests.
use quizzes?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
They're actually, we use logic tests, we do coding tests. They're not really there to pound people into the ground, just there to validate that they know what they said.
Okay.
It's that simple. But more to the point, I look for a person's ability to grow, learn, and evolve. Because quite frankly, whatever a person knows now, it's going to be obsolete within 3 to 5 years. So I really don't care about what they claim they did 5 years ago. I really care about their willingness to learn and adapt, and look for their interests, their ability to learn, what they've been working on, examples of projects. And more to the point, I also emphasize, the softer side, their ability to communicate, their ability to collaborate. And I sort of see hiring as a social function. It's just not me making the decision. I make sure that they talk to several members of the team Because I have to make sure that everyone has a good vibe about a person. Because if there's, I guess the one thing I would recommend is don't hire the brilliant technologist jerk, because that's the worst decision you can make. That'll leave such a wave of destruction. It'll take you months, if not years, to overcome.
And how do you, sorry.
Go ahead.
How do you kind of see that ability to learn and willingness to learn when you're doing either an interview or coffee or drinks or something? What is the signs or?
Yeah, so what they do in their spare time. Like chances are, if they have that ability, they're reading books, they're trying things, they're trying technologies, they show enthusiasm about a domain. They're active in some weird, well not weird way, but nothing kinky. They're active. They're active in promoting their knowledge or skill. They're what's the word I'm looking for? But anyways, they're active and they actually do what they profess.
Tony.
Well, I have a question about startup small business. I'm coming from a small business environment that we are sales driven. So I'm interested in your experience as a CTO. Do you ever experience how do you deal with the CEO in the company direction is driven by business or driven by technology? For example, we tap in every business possible, then we will sacrifice the technology investments in the defense, like architecture, etc. We'll do what we can to deliver the solution, tap the market, come back, maintain and fix. In the long run, sometimes we find ourselves doing more maintaining, fixing, building the product right to the customer, versus maybe look at big vision of technology investments, and which would be very expensive for a small business.
Okay. I think I'll try and answer the question. Let me know if I don't answer it, so I'll let you clarify the question. But I fundamentally see technology as a tool. So in a weird way, I'm kind of ambivalent about technology. For anyone that's trying something new, I usually try and counsel them to stay away from the state-of-the-art bleeding-edge technologies like Node. Well, I've heard there's a lot of hype about Node.js and Hack and other things. So I always say, if you're trying to do an MVP or test a business model, try something that's tried and true. There are far more Java developers, there's far more .NET developers, there's far more PHP developers than a Node.js developer. And it's really coming to the fact that there's economies of scale. It's very hard to find a good developer period in any language. So if you're looking across a bigger pool, you'll just have better luck trying to find someone in that pool.
Right.
But no matter what I find about technology and business model, it's serving the need of something. So something that generates value from the market. And trying to find your way to product market fit, you're going to discover new things. And chances are, I've never seen a perfect technology. I've never seen a perfect architecture. I've never seen perfect code. So why try and pretend that it exists? Chances are you're gonna recode something half a dozen times before you achieve product market fit in some shape, way, or form. So I see it as an iterative development cycle, and you're always learning new things. And chances are what you thought was the best approach is probably going to be incorrect as you peer back over time.
When you say chances are you're going to recode, does that mean
Like 100%?
They're 100%. You're gonna go right back to basics and start.
Chances are you're gonna, especially if you're doing MVP. Chances are whatever code base that you had at the beginning, it won't exist later after several iterations. I've actually never seen it.
So here's a question. How come in a first meeting when I sit down with developers, they tell me it's going to take a month, and then after 2 months I say, how long is it going to take me? And they say it's going to take 2 months. So in other words, is it possible to sit in a meeting with a set of defined requirements and to set a schedule and to deliver according to that schedule?
Well, here's the thing. One thing, well, maybe it's one of the key principles that I found, and it's whole point about agile and the methodologies as well. But human estimation falls apart very quickly. So if you're trying to estimate something over months and months and months of time, it's a totally random walk. They might as well be throwing. You'll probably get as good an answer from throwing something at a dartboard. I find human estimation from my best developers falls apart after 2 to 3 days. So
That's a great quote. That's going up on the video.
So that's the whole point about iterative narrow development. So in the ideal sense, you should keep iteration cycles short, between 1 and 2 weeks, and you'll discover new things. And we got really good at that at Rypple.
Yeah.
Once we got down into iterations or development cycles of 1 week, we're hitting the mark. Over
But in 1
90% of the
week,
time.
so you're defining, when you're defining a sprint of 1 week, you've got to be, you're not really planning to get an entire feature done.
No.
You know, so how do you create a milestone in this week?
What we had is priorities. So we had priorities coming in from product management, from customer service, from key initiatives like Social Goals 2.0. That was a big issue or big deliverable that was related for Facebook. Then I guess released generally on December 12th, 2011, if I recall correctly. I remember that because we announced Salesforce 3 days later, so it's kind of burned into my mind. But the key thing is you get all the key people in a room and you agree, yes, everything's important, but for this week, these are the relative priorities. And it's my job as the engineering manager to knock off those things as quickly as possible. And the key thing, so if you don't do that, you're going to wind up with task switching, you're going to wind up with things that you just didn't know. So it's going to totally blow your schedule. And I'm sure based on your experience.
Well, and not just in one company, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I've never really gotten into a situation where I've talked to a developer and said, okay, how long is this going to take? And it not been, at the deadline, and we still have more work to do.
Right.
But I mean, I think that your answer is fantastic because, estimating beyond 2 or 3 days there's no science to it.
No, maybe with AI, but
Yeah.
I've yet to see a human predictably plan for any complexity beyond that scale.
Right. Go ahead, sir.
So if in the process of delivering the product, you're realizing that the market is changing, and so the deliverables are not so actual maybe for customer or maybe for the company itself. So what is your suggestion? So is it better to change everything and make some adjustments for the deliverables, or just keep going until you will meet the milestones?
Well, the whole point about Agile is if you detect a change or suspect a hypothesis, you try it out as quickly as possible, right? So, and maybe it'll go down to a key lesson learned as a rule of thumb is, this is me talking as someone who's done product management. This is someone who's mentored, several great product managers, and honestly, we're all batting about 500%. And the true test of any hypothesis is the market. So what I would recommend anyone to do is code something out as quickly as possible, the so-called MVP or whatever you want to call it, and try it on where it really matters, the market. And that way you'll be able to test, you'll get real instantaneous or hopefully instantaneous feedback as to whether your hypothesis has any merit. And I guess that's where Facebook and Google, that's what they focus on. Everything from font changes to colors to whatnot. They do tons of split A/B testing. And I guess you've seen them evolve fairly quickly over time on that basis.
Go ahead.
It's my impression that if we don't see any companies like Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat as a Canadian company, And my impression is, we only like to create startups which solves a practical problem, whether it is Redknee or whether it is Nortel or BlackBerry, which solves a practical business problem. So is it a bad idea, or why is it like, we don't find such success stories in Canada?
Well, again, the counter to that is Kik. Kik is again another success story, which is in the same realm as Snapchat and WhatsApp and others. They're like 150 million users worldwide is nothing to sneeze at. And I would say that it's not necessarily that the startups aren't there. I would say that I think the investor community in Canada does focus on enterprise more so than
Profitability
yes.
faster.
So I think that's more of a bias or maybe even distortion of the investor community within Canada.
Right.
So is it a bad idea to think of launching something like that here and better go to Valley?
I'm not sure if it's about, Kik has been successful, so
Does
obviously,
Kik,
It's an exception, right?
Sorry, does Kik, well, I don't know, but does Kik get to where it is today without Fred Wilson? Or whoever is kind of the lead from Union Square?
well, they've had investment from our Foundation Capital
Right.
by their last round, and they were a U.S. firm. So interestingly enough, Kik got investment from U.S.-based.
Right,
VCs.
okay, so that's my question. Does it get that far if it's domestically funded?
I'm not sure if I'd be able to
Right.
totally answer that, but I suspect, at least in Canada, my sense is when I talk to the investor community, they do focus on enterprise SaaS, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Obviously, there are a lot of great companies in that space, Mercatus being one of them, in Canada, but you see less B2C being actively funded.
Is there
in
still a
Canada.
warrant for your arrest in Germany?
No.
So tell us a story about.
Oh, okay. I guess you're referring to. Okay.
No, like the one that was related
Yes.
to Redknee.
Yes, Redknee. Okay. That's the one. Okay. Well, there was I guess that was one of my perhaps one of my most stressful points of life as a chief technology officer. So the context is Redknee had deployed a fairly innovative product. It was called Multisim, but it's equivalent of a one-number service. And to put things in perspective, this is pre-internet. For those of you who are familiar with GSM mobile technologies, in order to implement one number across several GSM phones simultaneously, what we did is we actually intercepted or intermediated all the signaling traffic for a network. So all the yeah, it was that. Yeah, it worked. So the cool thing,
It kind of worked.
it worked. The cool thing though was really cool technology. So we were doing one number servers pre-internet on existing GSM technology, and it required no changes to the SIM, no changes to existing mobile handsets. But a person could have the same number and could actually intelligently divert traffic based on location, based on usage to the appropriate device. So it was really, really cool, light year ahead of the practice stuff. They actually got a patent on, maybe not unsurprisingly. But the issue was, because we were sort of intermediate intercepting all the signaling traffic, in a given release, I think we had if I recall correctly, it was a memory leak which caused a cascade, actually a synchronization issue between our clusters, which causes a cascade outage, and basically O2 Germany went dark very quickly.
So you knocked out the phone system.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. So how was that day? I mean,
It was.
so one of the things that we also talked about is like, just plodding along every day, and people don't understand the difference between the glamour of the startup and so how was that day?
I learned a lot of new words in German that day.
Because you heard them, or?
I can't repeat them, apparently. Yeah, but it was stressful. Obviously, actually, ironically, I was traveling in Germany at the time. I had to go to a hotel phone to actually make a call.
Did you feel like when you were rolling out the product that there was a risk of that happening?
as you know, telecom is all about high availability, and Redknee has had a great history of meeting or exceeding telecom grade or 5 nines availability, and we had developed our own clustering technologies to support that. So definitely, again, it had been deployed for some period of time. It was just one release that unfortunately caused that issue.
Okay, who's got their last question? Okay, Eric, I guess you can.
Yeah, sorry. I opened the window, so if anything starts getting a little cool in here, just let me know and I'll close them again. It seems like it's getting a bit hot. But just revenues versus non-revenues, and I apologize, I didn't step out for a minute, but you got the WhatsApp stories where 450 million free users, you're not going to monetize them, bag $19 billion. You've got a lot of companies that after you get the MVP stage, you're looking at, should we go free, should we go freemium, should we be paid? You've been in a number of companies from startup through to scaling. What's your sort of view on free versus pay, and what drives those decisions, and what are the right ones?
Okay, so I don't think there's an easy answer to that. Obviously, in the end, something has to generate value. And there are interesting markers that can be indicative value. Obviously, straight up revenue is the best indicator of value. So if it gets to the point that someone's willing to pay some meaningful amount of money for a service, that's where you want to, that's the nirvana, that's where you want to reach. The other secondary marker is some level of engagement, the ability to use a service, the ability to engage and members on a service. So if you don't have revenue, I would look for markers of engagement in some fashion, whether it's time on site or some whatever. It's really a function of the service, but some degree of people gravitating towards a site to the point that they only want to use that site or service.
Go ahead.
Thank you for that. So with regard specifically to Mercatus, just out of curiosity, you said you have about 26 people working on the product right now. And I have a little bit of a sense of what it involves to like onboard a grocery store. So just wondering, roughly after 6 years of this platform being built out, how much of the team is spent on like core development, and how much of it is spent on onboarding and process integration with these different grocery stores? Just to give a sense of, after all this time, how much time is still being invested in product development?
Okay, so first of all, I've been at Mercatus for 2 years. Okay, but in terms of time spent, and actually we had the same issue at Redknee. So as we're developing this grand unification rating scheme, we had sort of the same sort of quandary in that as we're developing this core technology, and then we're developing this core e-commerce fulfillment technology in Mercatus, I would say actually the overwhelming majority is focused on the core. But where there are bursts of activity, it's always on integration. And the cool part is, once you develop an integration API or integration interface, it's reusable. So as an example, we integrated with Zabawskyj, which is Google's couponing service, and one store, and lo and behold, another store wanted to integrate with that same couponing service. So what we'll probably see over time, and I guess they'll be validated over the next 2 to 3 years, is as we build out the sort of this library of interfaces and APIs and integrates with all these great marketing, technology, and analytic entities, we'll have a nice little library that'll be reusable, and it'll definitely reduce the integration cycle.
Amazing, thank you.
Was there a conference call the day after the WhatsApp application at Kik?
I'm not sure, but I'm sure, I suspect there was some activity between.
So I guess another way of putting the question is there, what's the scenario for Kik now as an advisor? Obviously this doesn't reflect the official, position of Kik, but there has been a number of acquisitions. I suppose there's room for others, but.
Well, I know Ted is still on the page of evolving Kik, and I guess the latest platform is sort of a HTML5, distribution mechanism for HTML5 centric applications, which is reportedly going really well. So as far as I know, Ted's still going straight on as for Kik as an independent concern. And my part of that is making sure that it continues to grow. So really testing the limits of its.
How many people there now?
Still under 30.
Well, that's awesome. Okay. Anybody else back here? Okay, we're into second questions. Go ahead, and then we'll.
About the legal defense that you had with Kick, actually we lost quite a bit of dough in my previous venture because we had an innovative idea. We were going against an established player, and the mistake I made was I didn't take the $2 million in funding that was offered to us because I wanted to keep most of the company to myself before somebody came and sued us, right? So my question is, if you had an innovative idea, let's say, something better WhatsApp plus, right? I'm just saying, again, it's not a copy of WhatsApp, I'm just making this up. How would you go about launching it? Like, developing, because I'm a techie, I know probably, we can develop this thing in a 6 months to a year, maybe under $200,000. But I know that what comes next, just like BlackBerry sued Kick, right?
Yes.
Chances of, if we are going to go against an incumbent, then the chances of that happening, at least in my mind, is very high. How would you go about approaching this situation?
I'm not sure is your question around the value of intellectual property or the value of patents generally, or because I wasn't sure if that's where you're.
So my question is, how would you defend yourself? You already know that you are going to launch something which is a better product than established company. You are likely to get sued. How would you go about launching, or should not you launch something like that?
Okay, so you're talking about IP landmines or a minefield generally. Again, there's no easy answer to that. My view around patents is, I think, fairly pragmatic. Patents are definitely a long-term initiative. It costs a lot of money. It takes a lot of time. So generally, even the cost of an average patent application is in order of $10,000 to $15,000. So it's a lot of capital to invest on something which may never be granted.
Okay, last question.
So I know that technology has done a lot to help sales. I actually find now that it actually is almost eliminating sales forces in a lot of ways. Have you come across any really useful technologies that have helped companies grow when before people were hustling, pounding the pavement, calling? And where do you see technology kind of replacing sales forces?
It depends on what you're trying to sell to. So in the case of Redknee, Mercatus, where we're trying to land multi-million-dollar contracts, it's tough to automate that. It's very much a consultative, relationship-oriented sales process. That largely because it's really selling to the C-level executives, and I don't think there's a technology that really automates that or tries to circumvent that. If you're in the case of Rypple, it's a mixed bag. And what you try and do is, I guess you try and implement, or if you go lower scale or lower tier, you try and make it as zero touch as possible. You put everything on the website, including help forms, and why don't you try and achieve so-called zero touch, where people have that experiential process and go from first touch to actually, putting in their credit card information within a matter of hours or days at the outset.
It's like for us, we're starting to see how technology can actually help us grow, businesses and people that are using our product. So it's, instead of investing in a sales force, you actually invest in a developer who's going to build, or people who's going to build, a technological funnel. How do you see companies now, should they be thinking about that's how they should be investing money into increasing sales, is to develop a tech team that's going to make it happen versus a salesperson?
Again, I think it's a function of what market you're trying to attack. If you're B2C, it's all about, if you vector towards B2C, it's all about that latter stage. You want to develop a cool product, cool UI, UX, to decrease any points of friction from usage, to increase engagement to the point that they really want to use that service, to the point that they're willing actually to pay for that service. Whereas extreme end, which is the multi-million-dollar deal, that you still need to grab the head on a flight to meet the C-level executive to pitch them in person to establish that relationship.
Any specific tools, tech tools you've actually used before that be really helpful in when you're doing B2C?
I think a lot of it is, and this is my opinion or my experience, a lot of it is just testing the methodology. Because again, I'm not sure if it's a specific tool or maybe a process by which you actually try things out to see to reduce points of friction or hypothetical points of friction with the end user base.
So are there, okay, so thank you. We'll try to wrap it up here. But, so again, going back to our conversation before you came in, or over the phone this week, you've been through an IPO. You've been through a sale to Salesforce, you know, so those are a couple of major exits. When you reflect on it, is it like, were there moments where people were sitting around high-fiving, or did it all feel like, oh my God, we got more work to do? You know, so do you ever get that moment where it's like, wow, that's it, awesome, we did it? And then secondly, as you reflect back on the Redknee experience, on the Rypple experience, are those key moments what make it all worthwhile for the grinders, or is it really the daily thing?
Well, again, this is subjective. Maybe for some people it is that defining moment that people remember, but in a weird way, the sale, the IPO, while they were affirmations, they weren't as important to me. Again, for me, it's growing the team, seeing the product deployed in a new country, opening up a new office, or even seeing people flourish in their own right. That was more meaningful to me as an individual.
Anything else that you'd like to say to wrap up?
Obviously, I wish I would say, you know, I've been through a number of startups, I guess at this point in time. It's a lot of hard work. It's not easy, but in a strange way, it's probably the most fulfilling thing that I've done. And even though I have a day job, it's also I guess I liken, people always wonder, like, how do you advise half a dozen startups and perhaps more informally? And I liken it to a hobby / addiction. It's just something I can't not do. It's something that I find fulfilling, I find inspiring, and entrepreneurs generally. It's amazing what they're willing to put themselves through, the amount of energy that they emanate, and it's something that's really an irresistible force.
Thank you very much.